Hey guys, welcome back to the show where we discuss the truth of what's going on in your psychology, figure out what exactly is going on, bring clarity to it so we can figure out exactly what we need to do to make the decisions we want to make so we can live the life that we want to live. If you feel stuck, like you can't make a decision that you want to make, typically we would call that feeling stuck. What a lot of us try to do is we just try to force that situation. We just try to force our way through that situation. I'm going to have a good attitude, keep my nose to the grindstone, and that can work. And if that works, great, then you don't need therapy. But if that doesn't work, or if it only works for a few days or a week or maybe 2 weeks, and you feel like you're white knuckling it, barely holding on, and then you relapse into a Netflix binge or whatever your addiction is, scrolling through Twitter, a lot of interesting internet use, a lot of crying, then there's an issue there, right? There's an unconscious block there that keeps you from doing what you want to do, and you try to force it, and we think we're doing the right thing when we force it, and in a way we're not doing the wrong thing, but we're really not doing something that's helpful for us. One of my favorite moments in any movie, probably because I grew up in the 80s, but there's just something satisfying about this, is in Karate Kid, when of course Mr. Miyagi's having Daniel, wax the car, paint the fence. They're like, why am I doing this? Why am I spending so much time on cleaning your car, painting your fence, right? This has nothing to do with karate. What are you talking about? And then in a bout of frustration, Mr. Miyagi shows him, like, these are actually essential movements for karate. I don't know if they are essential movements for karate. I know nothing about karate. But in a movie context, that seems cool, and it's psychologically true. And guys who I know who know a lot about jiu-jitsu, they say pretty much the same thing about that. Like, yeah, there's like a bunch of cool moves and techniques, but ultimately it's about balance and body position. I don't know enough about jiu-jitsu to say anything about that, but it really comes down to a few basic principles. Just work on those principles, and everything else just kind of takes care of itself. And there's really been nothing like that for willpower. For willpower, we just look at the decision we want to make and we go, okay, I want to make this decision. And if I don't make this decision, then I'm going to beat myself up, drink 13 beers, wake up hungover the next day, feeling a lot of self-pity, low self-worth, a lot of shame. And then I'm going to just make myself make that decision again, and then I'll do it for a few days. And it's this vicious cycle. And what you're not looking at is, what are the steps? Like, what is the wax on, wax off? What is the paint the fence that leads to you making that decision in a healthier way? If somebody said they really like karate and they joined a karate tournament and they just went in there without any proper instruction, without learning the fundamentals, and then they got beat up and lost, which of course they would, without building the foundation, practicing, basic balance. I'm sure balance is a big deal of karate. And then that person said, hey, I really want to do well at karate. Would you believe them? No, I don't think you would. You would say, I don't think you want to do well at karate, dude. I think you just want to get beat up. Because that's what you're signing up for when you join this tournament, without working on lower order principles of this thing that you supposedly want to get good at, right? You got to go train with Mr. Miyagi, wax the car, paint the fence, and when I want to apply that, I want to be the Mr. Miyagi of therapy ultimately. So we want to work on our willpower, and that's what our question is today about. It's from a listener who is going through, sounds like, a period of intense anger, of intense grief. He recently experienced a loss. It doesn't matter what it is. He just experienced a loss, and what he's noticing is that this loss, experiencing this grief, it has helped him to manage his anxiety. It has, in a sense, helped him push through his anxiety and confront areas in his life, or not confront so much. Yeah, that's been happening too, but the main thing is he's been realizing things that he has been avoiding, that he wasn't realizing before this event that precipitated the grief happened. So he feels the grief. Of course, it doesn't feel good. Makes us feel like a raw nerve, like we're totally exposed, totally vulnerable. And with this new perception, that this new mental space, you can go, oh wow, this was an area of my life that I was avoiding. I didn't even know I was avoiding it until I had this experience. of grief. So he's asking, is this the same for others? Is this kind of what I mean by it's difficult to feel anger and anxiety at the same time, even though I think what he is feeling is grief? And yeah, this is something that I've talked about before. I know I did a video on this about, the benefits of competition a long time ago. I wrote an article called The Wrath of Winter and the purpose of winter. And I think I was in a miserable New York winter, which is not nearly as miserable as my Midwestern, Central Ohio winter that I grew up in. You're like, what's the purpose of this? Why don't I just live in Southern California? Well, I think the purpose of winter, the way that I used it at the time, is to get in touch with what's important. When everything dies, it's like that's the ultimate grief. Like everything dies. Snow White comes and kills everything, and it gets you in touch. You're more likely in those scenarios of more intense asceticism than you would put yourself through in summer. You're more likely to get in touch with what you need, and when you're in touch with what you need, that's anger, and that helps you push through your anxiety. And I think grief is very similar. And also, I discussed this in my article on the sacred value, how I analyzed Hunchback of Notre Dame, or Notre Dame of Paris. Oh, yeah, there we have Notre Dame of Paris. And now that book is about ultimately having a sacred value. And when you have a sacred value, when you have something that's represented by the Cathedral Notre Dame that you can attach your life to and just let it take you for a ride, anxiety doesn't matter as much. So yeah, that's how anger can be useful to push through our anxiety. I mean, the neuroscience of it, it's very similar to the neuroscience of anger. We have this frontal cortex, and there's different parts of the frontal cortex. There's different regions in the frontal cortex. Where we have this frontal cortex, HPA complex, amygdala, hippocampus, and this is where we process, this is where we feel emotions. And how we process and regulate emotions is actually not quelling so much the amygdala HPA complex, but the emotion center of our brain, but how we can process and become more aware. And ultimately what emotional regulation is creating connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and hippocampus, also making the hippocampus larger by talking through emotions in a certain way. And this has, of course, been demonstrated very well. So the idea is when we experience, this is where we experience fear, is on this complex and how it relates with our prefrontal cortex. Well, that's also where we experience anger. That's also where we experience grief. And there's just, you can go read a bunch of books. You'll probably find a book at an airport about this, about how grief affects the brain. And the regions that keep coming up are I have them written here, interior cingulate cortex, which is prefrontal cortex, and then the amygdala. At least that's an area associated with the prefrontal cortex. So, what happens is on a neuroscientific level, is when you experience a lot of grief, you can't really experience fear. The fear doesn't bother you as much. The fear that was limiting your awareness has dropped because now you just experience the grief. And what this feels like, of course, is, wow, I just went through this intense loss. I guess now confronting this fear that seemed like a big deal before, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. It seems like small potatoes compared to this grief that I just went through, this intense loss I just went through. So because it doesn't seem like a big deal, unconsciously, I am not going to distract myself from it anymore. And I'm going to be in a much better headspace to confront what this anxiety is. And this is what anger does. Anger, very similar how it affects our brain. What it does is very similar to a stimulant, to an amphetamine. This is why I do think ADHD is real, but it is overprescribed. And often it's probably 95% of the time, it's given to kids who don't have ADHD. It's given to kids who have anxiety that presents as ADHD. But the Adderall definitely helps, because Adderall is it's not even the stimulant, it's an amphetamine. And the amphetamine is dopamine in your brain. It is, in a sense, an anger pill. It is giving your brain the feeling of being in touch with your anger without you having to get in touch with your anger. So while it can be helpful to take Adderall and you see the benefit, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm working better, my anxiety is decreased, of course. Now you can do all that, or you can get in touch with your anger. And typically what I see in guys who have a difficult time with their anger, expressing it, there's some kind of, well, I better not say coffee addiction because I drink a lot of coffee, but like energy drinks. Energy drinks seem to be the what guys who have a difficult time with anger drink a lot of is, and so yeah, that's what's going on there. And that's why when you feel this grief, and this is why, why grief helps us to grow, and why experiencing a profound sense of grief is helpful for our initiation into whatever the next stage of adult development is for us. Because in a sense, we don't care anymore. We don't care about managing people's emotions maybe the way that we used to. We don't care about looking stupid anymore. How could you possibly care about looking stupid? I just went through this huge loss. My dad just died, whatever it is. I am naked and afraid and vulnerable in a world I never made. So let's start to make it. Let's start to manage that anxiety and get really clear about what that is. And in a sense, you're just acclimating your brain, acclimating this part of your brain that helps you regulate emotion. You're acclimating it to more and more stress. That's why it's so important when you are going through grief, if nothing else, is to have a place that you can go to and just talk about it. Not even about the grief so much, just what happened today? What are you going through? What are you experiencing? What's your perspective? Because that HPA complex that's firing, and we got to make sure that the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, is working it well to help not quell that, but help integrate that pain, help regulate it, help to manage it. Typically guys think that, and it's too bad. I mean, this initiation, this grief, whenever we do feel it, it's initiation. Like it's a call to go on, the next stage of our adult development. I mean, typically when guys feel grief, they think, well, because this terrible thing happened, because, so a common example of grief, the grief that a lot of guys feel, and by a lot of guys, I mean everybody, every guy ever, is, I can't believe I wasted so much time in my life. How could I possibly go on and live the life that I want because I wasted the past 7 years? I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just working to make my mom happy, and it was just psychologically a total waste. Or maybe I was tuned out on Adderall. I was tuned out on Adderall for the past 7 years. I mean, that's pretty much what happened to me. Not 7 years, but regretting that time I was given Adderall, and it worked, but it's not what I needed. Right? I needed to manage my emotions better. I could look back and go, oh, what a waste, because you're just tuned out emotionally when you're on that stuff. You become a robot. Oh, what a waste of time. Right? And now I can't go on to live the life that I want. But that's thinking about it backwards. When we understand grief and initiation and what the purpose of these things are, we think it's only because I have wasted time and I feel this deep sense of grief and loss because of it. It's only because I have that experience now. That increased range of emotion that I'm able to experience is only because I have that I am now able to go on and live the life that I want to live. Very similar when a girl breaks up with you, especially like your first girlfriend, she breaks up with you usually. Oh, there's a lot of grief there. Oh, that's painful. How can I possibly go on? She was the perfect girl for me. How can I possibly go on and create a healthy relationship now? I understand it feels that way. And if you're in that headspace, I would never try to convince you otherwise. The only thing I would say is to keep going. And I think what you're going to realize that it's only because you have gone through this grief of a girl breaking up with you and thinking, oh, she was the best girl ever. Oh, I'll never be able to find somebody else. It's only because you're able to feel those kinds of feelings are you now able to go on and really create a relationship that you want, because now you know what it means. You didn't really know what it meant before, right? You really had to experience it. That's that kind of that neurological load that we talk about. It's crucial for what we need to make the decisions that we want to make. And so the takeaway here is I actually have a quotation. I'm quoting myself here. I have a quotation from my article, The Sacred Value, and I read this and I thought, I'm not going to say this any better than I wrote this, so I'm just going to repeat it here. The blind man versus the man with one eye. The man with one eye knows what he lacks. Notre Dame, the church Notre Dame, reminds us that the blind man is more comfortable than the one-eyed man. To only have one eye is to know what you lack. To be blind is to be content. In the same way, we're all content to be unaware of X-ray light or ultraviolet light. Yet, the blind man lacks the knowledge of what he lacks. He lacks the sense of urgency that comes from lack. And he doesn't know, and he doesn't know that he doesn't know. The blind man thinks everything is fine, and when everything's fine, there's never a need for bravery. It's desperation that makes the man. And this is what grief, this is what anger, this is what a deep sense of loss gives to us. This is the gift, right? As we go from the blind man to the one-eyed man, and we go, whoa, I was blind, I couldn't see, now I'm seeing with one eye, and it's painful. It was way more painful than when I was blind. At least when I was blind, I wasn't aware of what I wasn't aware of. Now I am aware of what I wasn't aware of, and it's painful. And then it becomes a question of what you do to manage that pain and incorporate it into your life. And of course, that's what we can help you with here. We do free consultations, animusempire.com/schedule. We have a way of, we can go deeper. I can go deeper than any other therapist out there into your emotional issues. And at the same time, we can get really specific about what's going on. So specific to the point where we can say, here's how exactly to talk through the grief to manage it. Here's what you need to do to manage the grief. And we can lay it out in a, relatively strict structure, at least a structure for therapy, so we can simplify, right? Just simplify these issues. They're going to feel complex. They're going to feel overwhelming no matter what. So the first step, right, to go back to what I was talking about at the beginning, it isn't just to throw yourself into a karate tournament. The first step is just to break down karate, break down your psychology to its fundamental principles, and then you work on those, and then the emotions, the regulation, then from the regulation, the actions you need to take will tend to take care of themselves. And we do free consultations if you want more info on that. Thank you guys for watching. And remember that grief, anger, these are all great affects, great emotions that we need to wake ourselves up.